There is a particular quality to silence in the northern Ural Mountains in February. It is not the comfortable silence of an empty room or a quiet afternoon. It is total, absolute, almost geological in its weight. A silence so vast and indifferent that it presses down on the chest of anyone who enters it. The trees here are ancient and bent. The snow collects in drifts that rise to shoulder height without warning. The wind does not howl so much as it reasons with you, whispering through the spruce and birch with an insistence that feels almost intelligent, almost intentional, as though the mountain itself is trying to communicate something that human language has not yet found the words to express. And in the winter of 1959, in a country still shrouded in the secrecy and paranoia of the Soviet era, 9 young people walked into that silence and never walked back out. Their names deserve to be spoken carefully, because each of them was a real person with a face and a history and a future they would never reach. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old, an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, a city now known as Yekaterinburg. He was experienced, capable, and deeply respected by his fellow hikers. Zinaida Kolmogorova was 22, described by those who knew her as warm, spirited, and fearless. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishchenko were both 23, close friends who threw themselves into physical challenges with the reckless enthusiasm of youth. Rustem Slobodin was 23 as well, an engineer working at a closed Soviet facility, meaning a facility whose purpose was not discussed publicly. Lyudmila Dubinina was 20 years old, physically strong and deeply passionate about mountaineering. Alexander Kolovatov was 24. Nikolai Thibault Brignoles, known to his friends as Thibault, was 23. And finally, the oldest member of the group, Semyon Zolotaryov, was 38 years old, nearly 15 years older than most of his companions, a man who had served in the Second World War and was, by any measure, a seasoned traveler of difficult terrain. He had joined the group late, almost as an afterthought, and almost no one in the group had met him before the expedition began. Together, they were embarking on a Category 3 hiking expedition through the northern Urals, the highest difficulty classification in Soviet mountaineering at the time, reserved for routes considered genuinely dangerous, even under favorable conditions. Their destination was a peak called Otorten, a name that in the indigenous Mansi language translates, depending on the source, to either "do not go there" or "mountain of the dead." Whether that translation gave any of them pause is not recorded. These were scientists and engineers, rational children of the Soviet Academy, trained to trust data and observation rather than folklore. They had maps, they had compasses, they had experience, and on the 23rd of January, 1959, they boarded a train from Sverdlovsk and set out toward the mountains with the confidence of people who have never yet been given a reason to doubt themselves. The early days of the expedition were, by all evidence, unremarkable in the best possible sense. The group maintained detailed diaries throughout, several personal journals and a shared expedition log, all of which survive. They described temperatures that plunged well below freezing from the very first night, equipment that occasionally malfunctioned, and the slow physical exhaustion that comes from hauling heavy packs through deep snow for hours at a stretch. They also describe laughter, singing, and the small private jokes that develop within any group of people who spend long days together in difficult conditions. There are photographs. The images show 9 people who look tired and cold and genuinely happy. On the evening of January 28th, the group passed through Vishay, the last inhabited settlement on their route, and spent the night there. The following morning, they departed into the wilderness, and that is the last moment at which any outside witness saw all 9 of them alive. What happened over the following days must be reconstructed from their diaries, from physical evidence later found at the scene, and from the official Soviet investigation, a document that raises almost as many questions as it answers. What is known is that the group made steady progress through the first days of February, moving northeast through a landscape that grew progressively more exposed and hostile as they climbed toward the tree line and beyond. On the 1st of February, they reached the eastern slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. In the Mansi language, the name means dead mountain. The translation, in retrospect, is almost too precise to sit comfortably in the mind. On that slope, sometime in the early evening of February 1st, the group established their final camp. They pitched their large canvas tent on the open face of the mountain rather than in the sheltered tree line below, a decision that has puzzled investigators ever since, because camping on an exposed slope at those temperatures and wind speeds was not standard practice for experienced mountaineers. Igor Dyatlov was not a careless man. He had led expeditions before. He understood what exposure meant in these conditions. Yet the tent was pitched on the slope, facing directly into the prevailing wind. His reasons for choosing that location were never established. The last diary entry was written that evening. It describes the group eating dinner and preparing for sleep with the matter-of-fact practicality of people who have done this many times before. There is no indication of fear. The final entry in the shared group journal, written in a playful, sardonic tone, jokes about the harsh conditions and the next day's planned ascent. It is signed with a small hand-drawn figure. As far as anyone can determine, it is the last thing any of them ever wrote. For the next several days, the world continued without them. Their families in Sverdlovsk expected no word for weeks. The expedition was supposed to be out of contact for the duration. Fellow students at the institute waited. The mountains kept their silence. Then, on the 12th of February, the date on which the group had planned to send a telegram confirming their safe return, nothing arrived. Even then, there was no immediate alarm. Expeditions of this nature frequently ran over schedule. But by the end of February, with still no word, the reassurances began to feel hollow. On February 26th, a search and rescue party was dispatched into the mountains. Among the searchers were fellow students, trained mountaineers, and eventually military personnel. What they found on the afternoon of February 26th stopped them completely. If you've made it this far, you already know. This isn't just a story. It's a mystery that refuses to let go. 9 experienced hikers, a single night, and questions that, even after decades, still don't have answers. If you found this story as unsettling and fascinating as it truly is, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps more than you might think, and it lets me know you want part 2. Because we're just getting started. In the next part, we're going deeper into the evidence, the theories, and the details that make the Dyatlov Pass Incident one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in history. Part 2 will be out shortly. Follow for more true crime and unexplained mysteries.